Night fell like velvet over the city's glass towers, and inside the tallest of them, Mariah scrubbed the marble floors that reflected everything except her. The scent of lemon cleaner clung to her hands, her back ached, and her mind drifted between unpaid bills and the silence waiting at home. Each swipe of her mop was a prayer for a life she couldn't quite imagine but still wanted to believe in. Around her, the office gleamed an empire of people who never looked her in the eye, never saw her name stitched in tiny letters on her uniform. She worked with the quiet rhythm of someone who had made peace with being invisible, until the elevator doors opened with a chime meant for someone else. The sound broke the spell. Her head lifted. It wasn't the usual late-night security guard or one of the interns who forgot their laptop. It was a man whose shoes cost more than her month's rent, his presence bending the silence of the room. He didn't belong in her world, and she didn't belong in his, yet here they were two strangers on opposite sides of everything that mattered. His gaze swept the room once, then landed on her. For a heartbeat, Mariah wanted to shrink, to fade back into the floors she cleaned, but something in his stare held her there measured, curious, almost human. He spoke first, voice smooth as polished steel. "You work late." She straightened, clutching her mop like a lifeline. "Somebody has to." The corners of his mouth curved, not into a smile exactly, but something like one. He stepped closer, the air shifting between them. She could feel the weight of him, the quiet authority that came from a life where people said yes before he finished asking. Mariah kept her chin up. She'd spent her life being overlooked, but she wouldn't be made small. "Not tonight." The man looked around as though measuring the worth of everything in sight, then said, almost absently, "I've been looking for someone who understands work." The words meant nothing and everything. A flicker of unease passed through her. She had no idea that in the next few minutes, her life, the clean, predictable, worn-thin version of it, would tilt on its axis. Because whatever he was about to offer, she already knew it would come wrapped in danger, desire, and a promise she wasn't sure she could afford to keep. The next night, Mariah told herself she was only curious. She had every reason to stay away, but curiosity was stronger than fear. The man, Mr. Hale, as she'd learned from the brass nameplate outside the penthouse office, had left her a note folded neatly on her cart. "Meet me tomorrow. Midnight. No tricks. Just business." She almost threw it out. But here she was, the elevator gliding toward the top floor like it had been waiting for her all along. Her reflection stared back from the mirrored walls, tired eyes, calloused hands, uniform faded at the seams. She barely recognized the woman looking back. When the doors opened, the world changed. The office was transformed from sterile power to quiet luxury, city lights flooding in, a decanter of amber whiskey gleaming on the table, jazz whispering low from unseen speakers. He stood by the window, his back to her, the skyline stretching endless and alive. "You came," he said without turning. "Only to tell you I don't make deals," she replied. Her voice surprised her, steady, sharp. He faced her then, eyes cool and assessing, the kind of gaze that made people confess things they hadn't meant to say. "Everyone makes deals," he said softly. "Some just don't know the price yet." She crossed her arms. "I already paid enough." He studied her for a long moment, then slid a folder across the table. Inside was a contract and a check with more zeros than she'd ever seen. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "I need someone I can trust," he said. "For a private position. Personal assistant. Temporary. You'd work for me directly." She stared at the paper. It wasn't just money, it was escape. The bills, the eviction notice taped to her door, her mother's medicine. This was salvation in ink and signature. And yet something in his tone made her skin prickle. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you don't pretend," he said simply. "You see the dirt no one else does." The honesty of it struck her harder than any compliment. For a second, she forgot to breathe. Mariah wanted to say no, to walk out and leave him and his strange generosity behind. But she could already feel the decision forming, heavy and inevitable. He poured a glass of whiskey, offered it without asking. She didn't take it. "Think carefully," he said. "This deal will change your life." The words settled between them like smoke. She knew he was right. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted, a slow, trembling awareness that this was more than work, more than a transaction. It was a door. And when she finally reached for the folder, her fingers brushed his. It was only a touch, but it felt like a line crossed, a fuse lit. By the time she stepped into the elevator again, the city below seemed different, brighter, hungrier. She could still feel his gaze on her as the doors closed. She told herself it was just a job. But she already knew better. The first week was all rules. No questions about his personal life. No unapproved visitors. No distractions during work hours. Mariah nodded through every instruction, but something about the way Mr. Hale spoke precise, rehearsed, like he'd built his life to keep people out, set her teeth on edge. She was used to silence, but this was a different kind of quiet, one that hummed with secrets. Her days began before sunrise. She answered emails, scheduled meetings, and learned how to blend into his world of cold efficiency. His office was a fortress of glass and gold, but he moved through it like a man chasing something he couldn't catch. He rarely smiled, rarely looked up from his screens. When he did, it was as if he had to remind himself she was real. One afternoon, she found him staring at the city from his balcony, the skyline bleeding into dusk. "Have you ever stopped working?" she asked, setting his coffee down. "Work stops for no one," he said without turning. "That's not what I asked." He looked at her then, the question in her tone tugging something loose in his expression. For a flicker of a moment, the armor cracked. "If I stop," he said quietly, "everything I built falls apart." Mariah didn't reply. She knew that feeling too well, the fear that stillness meant collapse. But she also saw how his world was built on emptiness disguised as success. The next morning, the balance shifted. A rumor surfaced among the staff, something about the company, an investigation, money gone missing. Whispers chased her down the hall. When she passed, conversations stopped. Even the security guards looked away. By noon, she found herself summoned to his office. He was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low storm. "No one outside this building speaks to the press." "No one," he said before slamming the phone down. When he looked up, his eyes were sharp, tired, almost accusing. "Did you tell anyone about the documents?" Her chest tightened. "What documents?" He stepped closer, too close. "The ones you handled yesterday." "Don't play innocent, Mariah." She froze. It was the first time he'd said her name like a weapon. "I didn't tell anyone anything." "You think because I clean floors I can't keep a secret?" The tension snapped like a wire. He stared at her, jaw clenched, the control he prized slipping through his fingers. "I don't know what to think," he said finally. "I trusted you." The word stung, not because of the accusation, but because she realized she cared that he did. When she walked out of his office, her hands were shaking. She told herself it was anger, not hurt. She told herself she didn't need his approval. But that night, when she returned home to her dim apartment, she caught herself replaying his voice, every sharp word, every pause that sounded too much like regret. She had taken his deal. She'd stepped into his world. But now, for the first time, she wondered if she'd sold more than her labor, if she'd bartered a piece of herself she couldn't get back. A winter storm swallowed the city the next morning, trapping half the staff at home. The elevators hummed with emptiness, and for the first time since she'd taken the job, Mariah and Mr. Hale were alone in the building. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft hiss of wind against the windows. He stood at his desk, tie loosened, eyes darker than usual. "Looks like it's just us today," he said, not quite looking at her. Guess even billionaires can't buy their way out of the weather, she muttered, setting down his coffee. A flicker of a smile crossed his face, brief, reluctant, human. You'd be surprised what money can't fix. The storm pressed harder against the glass, the world outside blurring into white. Mariah pulled her sweater tighter, the office suddenly too big, too quiet. She busied herself with paperwork, trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped every time he moved behind her. By noon, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, computers blinked out, and the elevator went still. Mr. Hale cursed under his breath, checking his phone. Backup generators out too. We'll have to wait it out. How long? Could be hours. He motioned toward the lounge, softer lighting, leather chairs, a fireplace she hadn't noticed before. It crackled to life as he lit it, warmth spilling into the space. You should sit. No point in working by candlelight. She hesitated. Sitting felt dangerous, too intimate, too still. But exhaustion and the cold one. She lowered herself into a chair opposite him. For a while, neither spoke. The fire painted gold across his features, softening the sharpness she'd come to associate with him. About yesterday, he said finally, voice lower than the fire's whisper. I shouldn't have accused you. Mariah looked into the flames. You think saying sorry fixes it? No, he said after a pause. But I mean it. The quiet stretched between them, not empty this time but charged, like the air before lightning. She studied him, this man who owned half the skyline yet looked somehow smaller here, sitting in the glow of something real. You don't trust people much, she said. People cost too much. Everything does, she murmured. That's what you taught me. His gaze lifted to hers then, something raw and unguarded flickering there. For a heartbeat, neither of them looked away. The storm howled, but inside the walls, warmth gathered. They shared coffee that turned cold too quickly, stories that slipped out before either could stop them. He told her about the first company he lost, the betrayal that burned his faith to ash. She spoke of nights spent cleaning offices like this, pretending she didn't dream of more. By the time the lights buzzed back to life, the world outside had changed from white chaos to calm gray dawn. She stood, suddenly aware of the distance closing between them. I should go, she said softly. He nodded but didn't move. You don't have to. For a second, she almost stayed. But the weight of what hung between them was too much, too new, too dangerous. She walked to the elevator, heart thudding as it came back to life. When the doors slid shut, she caught one last glimpse of him by the fire, his face caught between shadow and regret. She told herself it was a relief that she was leaving. But her hands trembled the whole way down. The following week, something in the air between them changed. Mr. Hale was quieter, measured, as if the storm had left an echo neither could name. Mariah moved through the office with her usual precision, but her thoughts strayed back to the firelight, to the look he'd given her before she left. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself she believed it. One evening, as the last of the staff filed out, she lingered behind to finish sorting files. A folder slipped from the stack, scattering papers across the floor. She bent to gather them and froze. A name she recognized. Her mother's. Her heart stuttered. The document was an old employment record, medical debt, wage deductions, a contract from a cleaning company that no longer existed. And there, printed clearly, was Mr. Hale's signature at the bottom. The room tilted. Her mother had worked herself sick cleaning luxury offices for a man she'd never met. The same man now sat in the next room, sipping whiskey and trusting her with his calendar. She gripped the folder so tightly her hands shook. Mariah? His voice came from behind her. She spun, hiding the paper against her side. He stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, the soft fatigue of late hours shadowing his features. Still working? Always, she said, too quickly. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Something wrong? Nothing. But he noticed the tremor in her voice, the way her knuckles whitened. What are you holding? Her chest burned. Old files. He reached for the folder. She took a step back. Don't, she said, sharper than she intended. The tension rippled between them, something fragile breaking. His expression shifted from confusion to realization, then to guilt. You found something. She lifted her chin, fury rising to drown the ache. My mother worked for one of your companies. She died owing you money. He looked as if she'd struck him. Mariah, I didn't know. Don't lie to me. You knew what kind of contracts those janitors signed. You knew exactly what you built this empire on. He ran a hand through his hair, the polished composure gone. That company was handled by investors. I wasn't. But you were in charge, she cut in. You still are. The air between them thickened, grief and anger blurring into something uncontainable. I hired you because you reminded me of someone, he said finally, voice low. Not your mother. I didn't know about her, but the way you looked at this place. Like it was never going to love you back. I saw myself in that. Her throat tightened. That's not an excuse. No, he said. It's not. The silence stretched. Somewhere below, the city pulsed distant, uncaring. She dropped the folder on his desk. You wanted someone who saw the dirt. Well, here it is. He didn't stop her when she walked away. He didn't say her name. But as the elevator doors closed, she caught a glimpse of him through the glass, head bowed, the contract trembling in his hands. For the first time, Mariah wasn't sure whether she was walking away from him or from the part of herself that had started to believe he could change. Days passed in silence. Mariah didn't return to the office, and Mr. Hale didn't call. She told herself she was done, that walking away was strength, not surrender. But each night, as the city lights flickered through her thin curtains, she felt the weight of unfinished words pressing against her chest. Then, one morning, a knock echoed at her door. When she opened it, he stood there, not in his usual tailored armor, but in a dark coat, rain dampening his hair, eyes stripped of arrogance. You shouldn't be here, she said, stepping back. I know, he replied. But I needed to see you. She almost closed the door, but something in his voice stopped her. He looked tired, not the kind born of work, but the kind that came from regret. Against her better judgment, she let him in. Her apartment was small, 2 rooms and a view of a brick wall, but it was hers. He glanced around, taking in the stacked books, the half-finished sketches on the counter. You draw. Not well, she said, crossing her arms. Why are you here? He hesitated. You were right. About my company. About your mother. I went through the records. I can't change what happened, but I can fix what's still broken. She wanted to be angry, to hold on to the bitterness. It was safer that way. But the tremor in his voice disarmed her. And you think money will fix it? No, he said quietly. But maybe honesty will. The words hung there, fragile and real. She turned away, pretending to busy herself with the kettle. You have no idea what it's like to live like this, she said. To be invisible until someone like you decides to notice. I notice now, he said, almost a whisper. Her hands trembled. That's not the same thing. He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Mariah, I don't want to own you. I just want to understand what it costs you to survive. Something inside her cracked the wall she'd built out of anger, pride, and exhaustion. She turned, meeting his eyes. You can't understand it. But you can listen. He nodded once. And he did. They sat at her small kitchen table while the rain softened against the glass, trading stories neither had ever told aloud. She spoke of her mother's laughter, her father's silence, the years of working nights and chasing daylight she never got to live. He told her about his childhood, the father who measured worth in profit margins, the loneliness he mistook for success. Hours passed unnoticed. The air grew warmer, lighter. At some point, he laughed softly, unguarded, and she found herself smiling back. For a fleeting moment, it felt like something sacred had been rebuilt from the wreckage. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "You've given me more than you know," he said. She shook her head. "Don't thank me. Just do better." He nodded, eyes lingering on her like a promise. Then he was gone, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. Mariah leaned against the door, heart unsteady. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope.